Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erica Mayall, and today I have another special guest for you. I am joined by Rosina Andrews. Rosina is an internationally recognized dance educator and choreographer known for her innovative approach to dance training. A pioneer in technical and performance development, Rosina has transformed the way dancers master turns, leaps, and overall artistry through her Dance Smarter approach, which we will get into later. With a background in both professional performance and education, Rosina has worked with dancers and studios worldwide, sharing her expertise through workshops, intensives, and her best-selling books, Pirouette Surgery and Leap Surgery. Her unique training concepts have become essential tools for dancers and dance teachers striving for technical advancement. Rosina's passion for dance extends beyond the studio. She is dedicated to inspiring and empowering the next generation of dancers through her teaching, research, and commitment to pushing the boundaries of dance education. So, welcome to the podcast today, Rosina. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica. Yeah, when I listen to that, when you listen to something you've done and you're like, wow, I actually managed that. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and we can chat. Yeah,
absolutely. So like I usually start when I have guests on the podcast episode, I'd love to go way back to the beginning. Little Rosina, how did you get involved in dance? What are your earliest memories of dance?
Way back to the beginning. So my mum is a dancer and dance teacher. She owns a dance studio. She was a professional dancer back in the 70s. She's going to kill me for saying that, but she was. And she's like, I look back and the way she thinks, oh yeah, when I dance with this person and that person, legendary. So yeah, I grew up in the dance studio and I'm in the UK. So when we get to 16 or 18, you get to decide whether you're going on to further education in dance. And I moved on to what we call dance college. I went at 16, which is quite rare. Most people go at 18, but I was very much ready. That's all I'd ever wanted to do. So I headed off to dance college at 16, which was really lovely. My early memories of dance, I feel like for me, it's the backstage memories, like backstage myself as literally at competitions or on stage, but also going backstage with my mum and seeing the industry from that side, which I think really, it's a dream, isn't it? Like you go, oh yeah, I'm backstage at the theatre, which to me when I was 7 was totally normal. But now I look back and I think, yeah, wow, they're my early memories of seeing my mum function that. And she's also an examiner and dance teacher, quite high up with the ISTD, which is a British Dance Association. And I think, I say British, they are worldwide, but predominantly British. And I think seeing her teach really inspired me to realise that teaching is also something that I would be interested in. I think, that's my early memories. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I actually grew up with ISTD dance, so I'm quite familiar, but we were one of the only studios in our area that did ISTD. Like it wasn't that common over here at the time, but grew up with 2 dance teachers who were from England. And so they had brought the syllabus kind of with them when they came over and opened the studio. And so we did all of the genres, ISTD, like ballet, tap, modern jazz, all of it. So, yeah.
I mean, that's rare. Like, it's rare to hear, because there's obviously very few places. I know there is places in Canada. In fact, I know my mum's examined at some in Vancouver. So you never know, maybe where your roots were. Maybe we've met before in that whole mindset way. But no, it's definitely something that I grew up with. And at the time when I grew up, there wasn't big competitions and leaps and turns. It was definitely syllabus, and the fun part was doing the dance at the end. So yeah, it's that's a memory of mine as well, like growing up, exams and things like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think nowadays, I don't know how it is like where you are, but here I think a lot of the kids, they still do some exam work, especially in the ballet. Like there are studios that still follow that ballet syllabus, but it's often like not their favorite. Like they're really interested in the competitions and performance opportunities and stuff. And then they do it because of the technique or whatever. But growing up, that was kind of all we had. We didn't have competitions.
Oh, yeah.
We had some festivals, but no competitions. And so I think that was actually really what developed my interest in the anatomy and the biomechanics and like the structure of dance and wanting to understand like how the body worked and the science. Like I think that the syllabus work set me up for that well. And like you were saying, like the teaching side too, where you can see the progressions and how it's broken down and all of that. So I think, little side benefits of following a syllabus work, although it's not as flashy and as exciting as maybe the competition world that some dancers are more used to nowadays.
Interestingly, when I go around for workshops and, teach, I teach really high level elite kids, and those ones that do the syllabus still, and I agree, I don't want to say it's a dying thing, but it isn't the coolest any longer. And the syllabus is probably the same as what we did when we were little, but you can just see an edge on their technical build-ups and things like that. And there are some gaps sometimes, especially if people don't do ballet exams in the syllabus, there's like some serious gaps. And I'm like, you're amazing that you can do a triple leg hold, but like, have you any concept of what plie or chassé or any of those things are? And they don't. And so I think, I am for all the leaps and turns. Obviously I have books on those specific parts, but I do think like the schools that have the syllabus, it does there's just a moment. Yeah. There's a balance of it all, isn't it? It's a balance. Yeah. Life is a balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. It's finding that. And like you said, like I think it is, the syllabus provides or can provide like a really great foundation. And then it's like you can put the jazzy bits or the sprinkles on top almost. And then it's like the fun stuff on top. Yeah. But you do need to have those understandings of like, where is your pelvis placement in a plie or things like that.
I find that even if you're not doing the syllabus classes within the studios, if the teachers have done qualifications within any of the exam boards, I'm not just saying guys,
absolutely.
Anything that a teacher has done something where there's a build-up and some understanding of how you get from A to B, I think that highlights. And I think, I don't know about Canada, and I bet it's similar. There's a rise of this like quick fire teaching like method that's like, oh, if you do this, this is going to happen. And you're like, that's not how I function. That's never. And I mean, as a physio, you must be like, what is going on? Like, why are we doing this? Yeah, because someone on YouTube did it once. So therefore we must always do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And then we lose like some of the, maybe foundations of, what are the building blocks of technique and those types of things. I want to circle back into this in a second, but I actually want to hear just a little bit about, because I know that you did go on and dance professionally sort of after. So can you just tell me a little bit about, just because I'm curious, kind of what your dance journey looked like?
No, I'm joking. I wasn't a rocker. I'm not taller. I obviously went to this dance college, and then I graduated and I moved into London, and I did some commercials, television commercials. I did pantomime. I don't know if you guys have pantomime. That's quite a big gig in the UK as a professional dancer. And then I started working with a contemporary company. I want to say contemporary company. It was more like, if I say commercial contemporary, the kind of contemporary that you see on So You Want to Dance and that kind of thing. It's So You Think You Can Dance, isn't it? Sorry. Yeah. We have a competition in the UK called So You Want to Dance.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh my God, don't even get me started. So You Think You Maybe Want to Dance, that's what I call it. So like the TV, any kind of
any of those,
TV show, that kind of vibe. And they had dancers from all over the world. And at that moment, that was when I realized there was more to what I didn't already know. Like I graduated, I was 20 years old, I knew my stuff. I was this professional living in London, taking class, doing auditions, etc. And then being in this company made me realize there was more to our world. And obviously this was wasn't pre-YouTube, but it was everyone just straight away hitting YouTube for inspiration. So, a couple of them were like, you need to go do some more training and like go explore the world. So that was when me and Sam, my husband, moved to New York for a year to train at Broadway Dance Center, which some people were like, why are you going back to train when you're already a professional? And for me, that year was life-changing. Like it changed how I perceived dance, how I realized other people taught dance, other countries. It proved to me that there's a massive dance scene in Sweden. Like I would never have considered that because I was in the UK living my little professional life, in London auditioning. So that was a pinnacle moment for me that not only changed how I danced and how I viewed auditions and what kind of jobs I did, but also how I taught. And I always say that year in New York was the best year of my life. As much as like people go, oh, would you move back there? I'm like, no, probably not, because yeah, I probably could get the O1 visa with enough people's recommendations, especially now with my books and all this. But actually, then I have to start afresh in a city that is massively difficult. And it won't be the same because I won't be 20. I won't be 21. I won't be having to, like, it's, yeah. So New York was a changing point for me. And I think anything North American, I have been lucky to travel quite a few places and spend some time in LA with some friends. And that for me is what I brought home. And that's where my teaching journey, I think, began, more so when I transitioned from teaching more in dancing into teaching.
Yeah, amazing. And that was going to be my next question, actually, is did you sort of continue dancing and then have like a definitive, like, I'm retiring from being a professional dancer, now I'm transitioning? Or was that a very organic change where like you started doing some teaching while you were still dancing and it was kind of more of a natural shift?
It was a natural shift. It's funny because sometimes when people ask me what I do, I still say I'm a professional dancer because I guess I am. And I dance for a living. I dance in the day. I'm not like on television doing it, but I am dancing in a dance studio more on a regular basis. But I think for me, what it was is I never thought I wanted to teach. It wasn't something that I thought would come naturally to me. And then when I started teaching, I was like, actually, I really love this. And it wasn't until, with anything, it's not until you find that one thing that you're like, I love this, therefore I am good at it. And it was kind of that transition that I was like, wow, I never thought this would be what I'd do. And I do love teaching, and I do love teaching. I mean, I teach a range. I teach my youngest stuff 5. And I teach elite, it sounds awful, elite 5-year-olds, but no, I do. The competition team 5-year-olds. I don't teach the average toddler class or anything like that, all the way up to students at our university level who really want to do this as a career. And it's very, very interesting for me. My favorite age is controversially like 13 to 15, which most people hate, but I love that age. I call that the refined stage. And that's the age that I'm like, getting into how they're thinking, getting into how they're moving and their specialisms and things like that. That's my favorite age. And I think I never thought I'd say that, but yeah, teaching teenagers is apparently my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that age of dancers are a different breed than like your average 13 to 15-year-old, because in the clinic, that's actually probably, I'd maybe say like 11 to 14 is probably the age of dancer that I see the absolute most of in the clinic, because it's adolescent growth spurt and it's increases in training loads and all of those things. And they're my absolute favorite to work with as well, because they're just so keen and they're little sponges and they've had no other distractions in life. Like they don't. But I don't think you could pay me enough money to go in and teach that age in like a school setting. I do think that,
for sure.
Like dancers of that age, I do think are really, really fun because they've reached that level of maturity. And you usually then, especially if you're working with more elite dancers, it's the ones who are dedicated. They think this is something they want to do with their life. Like they're invested, they're keen. And, we see a lot of those type A personalities too. So they're just like willing to work super hard to perfect something. And so I totally agree. I actually love that age.
I love that age. I think also they're yet to have, I know this sounds bad, but life affect them in any way. Like they haven't yet been told by someone, oh, you're not going to make it as a dancer, you need to do this. No one said to them, oh, you're not going to do that because you're going to have to travel the world and your boyfriend's back home. There's none of that. Like it's a very sounds like influential age. And I think it is special to work with them. And I think it's really nice for me. Like now I've been teaching like intensely now for like 10, 11 years. And I mean, my method has been around 10 years. It feels like crazy that Pirouette surgery is 10 years next year. I feel like I've literally only just finished typing that up. But for me, those children that I started with at 10, 11 are now 20, 22, 23, and they're in shows. And the ones that wanted to do it are all doing it. And it's so nice to like see their journey, as soppy as that sounds. It's really nice.
Absolutely though. It's like you see, their progression. It's the same.
Oh my God, Rosina, I've not spoken to you in ages, but did you know I'm just on Royal Caribbean's cruise ship and I'm just the lead? And I'm like, oh my God, I haven't spoken to you in 3 years, but congrats. It's so nice to hear that you're still doing it. It's really special, that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I would love to chat about how your actual kind of methodology developed, in terms of, because we've alluded to or kind of mentioned, you have the leap surgery, the pirouette surgery, kind of that is a bit of your specialty when it comes to teaching and things like that. But how was that something that was an intentional, you went out and kind of researched, okay, this is the best way to teach this stuff? Or
this is an interesting question. A lot of people ask me that. Like, why did you start doing this? And I think, again, it's going back to that year in America that I was shocked that me as a relatively good dancer who had graduated and worked professionally could do a clean triple, probably, and that was it. And then you're looking at these 10-year-olds that are doing like 7 or 8, and you're like, what is happening? Like, why are these children doing this? And then you're seeing it transition into the professional level classes where, no, they're not doing 50 a la seconds. But when there is a turn in the combo, it's so consistent and solid. And it was something that I felt was really missing from the UK at that time. It's changed a lot since. My husband always says it's because I did it, but I don't necessarily believe my pirouette surgery had anything to do with the change. I think internet growth, social media, YouTube exposed us in the UK to more than this, because we were only learning to turn really at age 14, 15, which to me is, having done research now for my books, is far too late for a natural movement. And whilst there is danger available in a pirouette, I mean, starting it at 7 or 8 isn't going to be that dangerous to the growth of these children. So for me, that was the moment that I thought, oh, wait a sec, what are we doing wrong? So I came home, my mum has a dance school, and I said to her, can I teach your 5-year-olds to pirouette? And she was like, oh, you can, but you're never going to get them to do that because they're too busy skipping around the room. And I actually managed it. Like, I managed to get these 5-6-year-olds doing double pirouettes. And I was like, what? My experience of all these different teachers that I was pulling together. And I think that's how I describe my method. My method is, for me personally, it's the genres and the skills that I've exposed myself to have kind of collaboratively come together to create something that I think works. These little kids started doing these pirouettes. Social media was on the up. I think I posted a video of a 6-year-old doing a double pirouette. It was massive. Everyone was like, what the hell is going on here? And then the workshops started coming in, and I started being the guest that used to go to visit the studios. And I still do that, not so much now, but I go visit the studios and teach these masterclass, which at 22, master class didn't sit right with me. I don't consider myself, now I would say I would consider myself a master teacher of pirouettes, because I have done it for a long period of time and a big experience. Yeah. But at 22, I wasn't necessarily the master class, but it was something different, and it was something that kids had not necessarily tried and had been exposed to. So that began, and then I'm that kind of person that when someone says, "Ooh, you should write this down, write a book," I'm like, bring it on. I didn't have a clue how to write a book. I'd left school at 16, albeit I am quite geeky and I was a nerd and I got really good grades at school and all that. But that was when the book was birthed. And then kind of the rest is history. Like, obviously, after the first one came out, people said, what's the second one? And the other thing missing, I guess, from the UK at the time was the big leaps and the connected power and strength and plyometrics needed for the leaps. Squat jumps were not a thing in 2012, 2013. We just didn't do them in class. Now we do. So that was leap surgery. And then Dance Smarter kind of followed in lockdown. So it gave me something to do. And that was really nice because, again, people just assumed I teach turns and leaps, which, yes, I do specialize in that. But I'm a contemporary dancer and I'm all for artistry and performance and freedom. And obviously those two books did not highlight that. So I was like, right, let's get this out. And yeah, the rest is sort of history when it comes to that. Dance Smarter came about purely because I wanted to make a change in how people viewed leaps and turns. And there's a big kind of, if you're an old school teacher, very negative towards anything that, let's say, dance mums are doing on YouTube. Those, like, however much we hate the concept of that program, those little girls doing those turns and leaps made a big influence upon dance teachers. And there was this like divide between, I'm not going to teach that because that's bad, and, oh, let's see what happens, and all these injuries. So it was kind of trying to find a happy medium that's exposing the kids to what they want without losing technique and balance and things like that. So that's kind of how that came about. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah, that's
that bit.
Yeah, it's all good. And that's actually probably like why we sort of like resonate with each other too, because that's exactly the same thing, sort of like where my like flexibility teacher training program was sort of developed from, because it was like, okay, the dancers are all wanting and arguably needing more of these extreme levels of flexibility, and the demands to like make it in the professional world are significantly higher than they used to be. But then it's like everything that you were seeing online, on YouTube, on TikTok, Instagram, whatever, was insanely unsafe practices. And so you had these teachers being like, absolutely not, I'm not teaching my dancers that, which is like absolutely fair enough.
Yeah.
But the dancers still need those skills. And it's the same with
when the
turns
dancer
and
moves to a different school where the grass is greener because they are doing the leg spin.
Exactly. And they're not necessarily doing them in a safe way, but they're doing them. And so, yeah, you're losing those students and stuff. And so it's the same thing where it was like, okay, I can fight against this and just say, nobody should be doing oversplits and all of these types of things, which, I still stand behind in some ways, but it's like we also need dancers to be able to achieve those levels of mobility or to be able to do the turns or do the leaps, but in a safer way. And so presenting a different way of doing things or a smarter, newer, more updated way of doing things. So, yeah.
It's that kind of teenage thing where you're like, you don't want them to do it, but they're going to have to do it. So do it in a safe way. Like,
yeah, and get the buy-in from them. Like, this is the way we're going to do it.
Yeah. I do think that, the social media and the YouTube versions of things, just if we're not going to teach it, they're going to do it in their lounges anyway, or their living rooms. They're going to try oversplit because they saw some kid do it. And I mean, at least I think there seems to have been a bit of a change in that. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing less of it. I'm seeing more people who are aware of it and educated now. So thanks to your courses and things like that, people are now batting down on it, but it does seem to flare up every now and then. There's here we go again. The yoga blocks are back.
Exactly.
The yoga blocks that are meant to help those that cannot do the splits are now
other kids up. Yeah, exactly. No, and it's true. And I do think, like you said, sort of there's a lot of potential negatives around some of the social media stuff with dancers seeing things and whatever. But I also think there's been a lot of positives. And I think that's some of the change that we've seen and some of the acceptance or understanding of better ways of doing things has maybe taken off more quickly because of social media and more people being connected. And so we see more openness to that. I'm curious, just because we're in different parts of the world, like because I know you were saying there's teachers who were kind of against the, turns and leaps and all of that kind of stuff. And I've had the same thing with teachers who, are maybe more hesitant or just steeped in tradition. Like the dance world just is very much a tradition. So I'm curious if you have seen a change within, the teacher population in the UK, that there is a lot more acceptance or willingness or interest in actually learning new skills and new teaching methodologies and stuff, or is it still a little bit of a battling against that tradition?
I feel like dance is the only profession where you say, or not so much you, but a teacher can say, oh, well, my teacher did this, so this is what I do, without any concept of the fact that was the 80s. This is now 2025. What you did then, if you looked at your hips and knees, is not necessarily translating. And it feels like the only career that doesn't necessarily move with the times. Like you see people that are still wearing the silver tap shoes with blue bows on them. And you're like, but my mum was wearing them in her competition photos. And
I wore those ones.
It doesn't move with the times. And I do think sometimes I do wonder, as much as I think syllabus is useful, sometimes they don't move with the times and that age stuff. But yes, I do see much more of a willingness to engage in courses and intensives. I have a teacher's intensive every summer, and it is my favorite weekend. And it's so nice to have these teachers come together and share ideas, and you send them home knowing that they feel better about what they're doing, more in a way, trusting that they can change the way they teach. Is more like allowing them to go, yes, you can do that. It's okay to do that. But what I notice, and I don't know if maybe you do too, I do courses and I banter on about what I'm talking about. And I really believe in it. And then they go home and the tiny bit of information that they seem to have taken from me is the one part that doesn't necessarily make the difference. So I'm like, you've missed the point. But at least you were in the course. So I meant do a course again, and then more and more will filter through. And I do think sometimes habit takes over. With these teachers, this works, so I'm going to do it. So yes, I see more of an acceptance into trying, but I'm not 100% sure I'm seeing the changes in the teaching as yet. And I mean that we've been doing this Dance Smarter thing for now, the teachers' courses, maybe 5 years, and I'm beginning to see it, but it is definitely a challenge to get people to change out of their tradition. Yeah,
absolutely. And
I would find out with stretching too. that were old school. And you're like, but no other world. You go to a medical profession and go, oh, back in the 80s, we did this.
Yep, this is how we treated back pain back then. So we're going to do it the same with like 6 weeks of bed rest. Like that's not what we're doing nowadays. Yeah.
And I just find it weird that it's a world that doesn't change.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think, because I always compare it to sport, because that's kind of like my sort of was part of my background in terms of working in sport medicine and things like that. And so I think in sport, there's always the, higher, faster, stronger, like everyone always wants to break. And so there's more willingness to accept, like, look, this new research shows that maybe you can shave 0.2 seconds off your time or whatever it is. And so I think they are faster to adopt change. Whereas in dance, because of the art and the fact that we don't want to lose the tradition in some of the art form of it.
Yes.
But it is also physical and arguably a sport in a lot of ways when we're talking about how we're physically performing it. Mm-hmm. And so it's like very much trying to balance or like reconcile almost that like disparity between wanting to keep some of the tradition of the art form, although arguably we could really get rid of some of the problematic parts of the history of the art form as well. So like, I'm not arguing we could be maintaining all of that, but I think that is where a lot more of the resistance comes from. And I think teachers sometimes have a hard time separating the two. And so it's like we really treat dance as art, and we obviously in a lot of instances should, but if we are purely stripping it down and looking at the physicality of it, we can't treat it as art. We have to treat it as more of a sport or like, it's a physical activity. And so then we actually want to continue to embrace the science and move forwards with the times. And it's challenging because I think those get confused or kind of like confounded. And that's where a lot of the resistance comes from, is people who really want to preserve the art form. And in some cases, rightfully so. And in some cases, probably forward with that too.
I think those people, also we're working in an industry of people that are super passionate and super creative and not necessarily scientifically minded.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't like that phrase, dancers are stupid, and that's such an old school thing to say. But we are not, well, not so much me or you probably, because we're quite book smart and generally like happily read a book on the scientific principles of something. But not every dance teacher wants to do that. They're creative, they're passionate, and because of that, sometimes the science goes in and goes straight back out because they're like, oh, I don't need that. I'm having a great time and I'm creating these amazing pieces of work. But actually, we do have to balance that whole art and athleticism, especially with what the demands are now.
Totally. And I see that a lot with choreographers. And so not even just teachers, but we get like guest choreographers coming in who are like absolute geniuses at their craft. And they come in and they have these like amazing artistic visions with absolutely no regard for like whether it's physically possible for somebody to like execute it. And some you can really like rationalize with, and some are just like, I don't care how this happens. You guys are going to make, And so I do 100% that. And it's like, they are literally artistic geniuses, but then it's like having to like try and help them kind of think a little bit more analytically about like, is this actually physically possible? Or like the laws of physics do not allow X, Y, Z to happen, but they have a vision. And so therefore,
well, remember, anything's possible. Sound harder, work harder. I agree with that. I think, it's funny. Some of the demands that you're like, okay. And I think as a teacher, I see these expert choreographers come in, set the pieces on said kids, and then I'm the one that has to clear it up. And you're like, what's going on here? Like, what are you meant to be doing? They're like, oh, it's meant to be this. And they show you some video of like some rhythmic gymnast. And you're like, oh yeah, so that rhythmic gymnast that's trained for like 40 hours a week since they're 3 are able to do this, but you not. So it's left upon us as the mere teachers to clean up the artistic work and save the poor 13-year-old from breaking their back, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a tricky balance, because we don't necessarily want to like stifle the artistry, but we also have to recognize that, especially with like dancers that you and I are working with a lot of times, like they're kids, they're still growing, they're still developing. We really have to be like super mindful and careful about how we're training them. But even professional dancers, like even the ones who aren't children anymore, like we cannot be like ruining their bodies for one piece of choreography for one, like when they, should have a career that spans, well, hopefully decades now. Dancers are starting to dance longer and longer.
But now, is there? No, I feel like, so my husband is a strength and conditioning coach, and we have a competition team that sounds awful, but they were our guinea pigs to start off with our method. They were what we tried it out on. And they now, we're 15 years into teaching these comp kids. These kids are quite well known in the UK. Like, that people are like, oh, they're at the comp. Like, oh. But we pride ourselves on the fact there's very few injuries because we're training it in all. And people are like, so surprised by that. And I'm like, well, I'm not pushing the 13, 14-year-old. I'm pulling back. I'm pulling back on what they're doing. And they're like, oh, and I'm like, no, you've got to like consider the long term. The odd injury that comes is usually from sport at school and they've played hockey for 17 hours or something. And you're like, oh, please, not before the dance comp.
Yeah.
Think of your knees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point because I do think that we absolutely can train these dancers in ways where we can achieve like really, really impressive things, but in a way that is smart and like keeps them safe and, protects their growing bodies and stuff. But we do have to be the ones who are like pulling back and reining them in a bit because like we kind of alluded to before, those like 13, 14-year-old dancers, I don't know a single one who isn't going to just like continue to push themselves. And so they want more. They want to master, the quintuple, whatever it is that they want to master. Yeah. And it is up to us. And I think especially, I don't teach in a studio anymore, but even in the clinic or when I did teach in the studio, it's hard as a teacher to also not get wrapped up in that when you think like, oh my goodness, like what is this kid's potential or where could they go? But we do have to think long term that it's like, okay, do we want this 12-year-old to be doing this or do we want a 16-year-old to be able to do this in 4 years' time and not have had to drop out of dance because of injuries or things like that.
Sometimes that's where the dance teacher or the studio's ego comes into play. You see the 6-year-old or the 7-year-old and you're like, hello, legs, hello. How flexible can I make you? And then you think, well, wait a sec. But some people don't. They just, and me and Sam were talking about this the other day. These kids are pushed so much pre-puberty and they are phenomenal. Like you're like, gosh, she's only 10 and she's amazing. But then they all seem to hit 12 and they sometimes begin to hate it because they have no other life. They've literally spent life in the dance studio being trained. They lose their love for it or they're injured or they get a bit chubby or whatever. And you see this demise of this superstar kid. And it's like, that's so sad because should we have gently taken the superstar kid? It will continue and it will continue upwards. But yeah, no, it is a bit of an endemic of this kind of push.
And it's yeah. And it's not just dance. It's like through all sports, like that idea of early sports specialization. And we've seen a huge shift in that. And I did a couple podcast episodes on that last year, maybe. I think there was like a 2-part series on that early specialization. So I actually did kind of look into it a bit. And there's loads and loads of research that supports not pushing kids like when you're young for that exact reason. Most of them burn out or end up with mental health issues or things like that. But it was really interesting to kind of look back at like the origins of when that started. And so there was a few kind of turning points in society with a couple of, sort of superstar athletes and things like that, that made parents be like, oh, okay, I'm going to now, push my kid. And then youth sports and dance is not excluded from that is big business. And so that is one of the things that we see driving that as well.
It's so hard. Like I look at my daughter and I'm like, sure she'd be great at gymnastics. And then there I am Googling gymnastics places and thinking, which one do I want to go to? Because I want to make sure that she's got blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, she's 2. Like, calm down. And I have to like bring myself. And it is like, I can see that she has potential in that kind of thing. She's not really a ballet dancer. She is not delicate. She enters a room and she trips. She's a problem. But I see it and I can imagine what that must be like as a dance teacher when you visualize that kid and if you need that superstar kid in your school, how hard it is not to be like, look at my kid.
And I think also then there's sometimes pressure from like the kid or the parent. And when you have like a kid who they are 7 and they're super keen and the parent's keen and they're like, we want to put her in everything or him. And, we're going to pay all the money and all of this. It's hard as a teacher / studio owner if you're also a business person and like, the dance industry is not the most lucrative business model out there. And so a lot of studios they need the revenue or like they're considering things like that as well. And they often do want that kid to kind of shine and showcase and they don't want to upset the family and so it's such a delicate balance of being like, no, actually our priority needs to be to have this kid shine when they're 18, 20, 30, whatever it is, and to really, rein them in a lot of the time. And I think that's one thing that's missing in the dance world. And like you said, I think ego can play a role in that, but also just, maybe the opportunity, or like, the allure of the opportunity to have this like superstar type kid. But our job often is to kind of try and rein things in a bit, go a bit more slow and steady, so that when they are, mature enough and
and then they don't learn. I feel like the ones that you gently rise, like I see at 13, 14, you see these kids that have been quite good suddenly get really good, and you're like, this is the perfect time to get really good, rather than being really good at 7 or 8, because they don't really know what's happening and they just shit between X, Y, and Z. And then like someone at school says, oh, did you know at the weekend I did this, and suddenly they switch to a different sport because they haven't experienced it. Whereas if you're gently rising them, that's I think again why I like that 13 to 15 age, because that's when you see the magic happen if you've trained nicely.
And they have those foundations and those building blocks, and whether that comes from syllabus or whether it comes from, just good technical foundational training. I don't think it matters one way or another. I think syllabus just gives some teachers a framework for that. Other teachers,
important, If you're a teacher who hasn't like exposed themselves to lots of courses or different kind of training methods, the syllabus at least gives you a framework.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't teach syllabus at all. I obviously teach my method, but it's not a syllabus. My Pirouette surgery and leap surgery have 3-level programs, but they're very loose. It's not like this is the set music and this is this. It's kind of, I'd say, more drill work, which we don't really have in leaps and turns, because it's not in the syllabuses, because obviously we train them to dance. So it's that little tiny niche that needs the drill. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's not like a syllabus, but you have a framework that you're following where there's like a, progressions. Because I see sometimes, just in like dance teacher forums and stuff where teachers will be like, just asking questions and, oh, how do I teach my kids to do like, X, Y, Z move? And it's like, well, you should actually know the progressions to that. Like sometimes I see those and I'm like, do you actually not know that this would be, and again, like if a teacher hasn't been brought up, because a lot of teachers go into teaching because they danced, not because they've done any sort of formal teaching qualifications. And so they actually truly may not know like the building blocks or the foundations of that. But I always find it interesting when I see those questions, and it's always a little like, right, that's not how everyone's teaching in studios. And a lot of studios, like the classes might just be more combo based. And so they're giving dancers new combinations to work on like every class, but it's not like a formal. So I do think syllabus can provide some of that foundation, but like you said, it's missing elements. It's not designed to necessarily incorporate some of the other stuff. And even from a just like physical conditioning standpoint, the syllabus don't actually cover any kind of like basic strength and conditioning type stuff. Unless you boys press ups in modern things like that.
That was something that when I first started teaching turns, I used to be like, for me growing up, I learned an arm exercise. I didn't ever consider that arms and legs could biomechanically work together to create form. I just knew that arms in dancing was an arm exercise, and then I did my legs. And then that was something for me that I was like, I need to change how this happens. Because in the US, when I trained there was no syllabus, and I was so surprised at how detailed and anatomical these teachers were, because I was like, oh my God, I've never considered that in my life before. No one's ever said to me, oh, if you move your elbow in connection with your abdominal muscles and your leg at the same time, this is going to happen. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. And using some of those like force planes and stuff. Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned about the forums there. I agree. I look at people posting a video of someone doing, say, a pirouette, and they're like, oh, I need help with this. And I'm like, but there's so much missing. Like, where's the build-up? And I mean, the people are savage on them, aren't they? There's some of the comments.
I know, yeah. I mean, they're not always a great place to be. But
if you're ever feeling a bit down and you want to giggle, they're a good place to be like, wow.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like they sometimes inform some of like, if I'm like, oh, what am I going to post on social media, or like what types of topics are teachers like? I actually use those a bit for that, because I'm like, a lot of teachers are asking about something that I think is like very basic information, or, that I'm like, oh, all teachers know this. And then a bunch of teachers will ask a similar thing. And I'm like, well, clearly they don't know this, and probably through no fault of their own. Because again, like a lot of teachers don't have formal teaching qualifications and stuff. And so I actually do use them from that. But yeah, like, the comments can be absolutely savage sometimes.
You don't want to be mentioned on one of them.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, if someone mentions like, oh, I need some help with turns, and someone Rosina Andrews has a great book, and it sounds like, why have we got so many books orders today? And I'm like, oh, it's because someone on Dance Teacher Network was chatting about it. No, it is interesting. And I think also for me, that really always highlights the gaps in teachers' knowledge. And when I do my teachers' courses, I always think I don't want to say, it sounds patronizing, but I feel like I teach common sense followed with science and extra. Because I don't have a science degree, so I don't go around it that way. I always employ people that have the science qualifications to do that part of it. I'm not a master of that, so I'm not going to do that. But I always find that I'm like, the common sense that I think is there is not necessarily there. So it's like, some of it you think is so basic, but actually that's the stuff the teachers need more so than some of the really in-depth stuff.
Well, I was going to say, sometimes that's what they're missing. And that's the thing that all of a sudden is like, oh, all the higher level stuff they actually already know now makes sense. They were just missing some of that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I fully agree with that one. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. I'm just looking at the time. I mean, I feel like we could chat forever and ever and ever, but I always like to finish my guest podcast episodes with 5 kind of like rapid fire or wrap up questions, just because I think it's fun. So if you are game for those.
I'm ready for a wrap.
They don't have to be rapid fire.
Yeah.
So the first question is, what's your favorite genre or style of dance?
Ballet. I love dancing ballet. I'm not majorly good at it. I'm not a ballerina, but I just love how that feels, and I love watching it when it's really pro level. I love watching ballet. Yeah, ballet.
Fair. Would you rather be on stage or in the studio?
I'm going to controversial this one. I'm going to say backstage.
Ooh, I like it.
I like the studio. I like being on the stage, and there's no buzz like it, but just that little smidge behind the wing, watching in.
Yeah, the excitement, the anticipation. Yeah, absolutely. All right. If you could dance with or share the stage with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, this one's trickier. I think I'm going to go back to Hollywood golden era, Hollywood greats. Gene Kelly, maybe, in Always Fair Weather, in his roller skates. I just can't imagine how amazing that time was. Yeah. We have some friends unfortunately, they've passed away now, but we had a Hollywood grandma in LA, and she used to tell us stories of all this, and I used to be like, oh, God, I wish I could be there. Yeah, so I'm going to say Gene Kelly. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. What is one thing you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
Adage does not define my career. Honestly, I used to get so worked up. My toddler sucks. Adage does not define your life. But yeah, when I was 17, Adage defined my life.
I like it. Most people, their like thing is like very, kind of a little bit more overarching, but no, I like it. I'm very specific.
Very specific.
All right. And finally, if there was one thing you could change about the dance world, what would it be?
So I think that it's kind of 2 things, but it blends together, is I want to change the whole, you're just a teacher, rather than you're a dancer, you're on stage, now you teach. When actually, if you're a good quality teacher, that's really hard. And the other thing I want to change within that is some people teach because it's the only thing they can do in between jobs. And at that point, ego and chip on your shoulder comes into place. And I feel like they're not doing it organically. And that's when you see kids with like mindset issues and all that. So I'd say celebrating that being a teacher is really hard and also really relevant and important. So that would be my
absolutely. And I mean, I would also add to that like just because you had a successful professional career does not automatically make you a good teacher, and vice versa. Some of the best teachers out there are teachers who never once danced professionally, but have, honed their craft and are absolute experts in their field. So I totally agree. Like actually recognizing and honoring teaching in and of itself as like a super, super important part of the dance world, and one that's maybe, not recognized for.
You always see an influx of people when there's been a big film come out, like the Wicked movie. Suddenly everyone does the Wicked workshops, and you're like, okay, cool. Like maybe you are really good at teaching, but you are literally just teaching it for a bit of money off the back of a film. And you're actually, and what hurts me is you hear people go, I'm just doing a workshop to make a bit of money for a holiday. And you're like, don't do that. Go do it somewhere else. Get out of the world. Let me teach it instead.
Let the experts or the professionals who do this for a living.
Yeah, absolutely.
It has been amazing chatting with you. Like I said, we could probably chat forever and ever. But if listeners are interested in learning more about your, especially like pirouette surgery, leap surgery, like your teaching methodologies, how can people find you? Where can they reach out? What are the best places to contact you?
I'd say the best place is heading to my website, rosinaandrews.co.uk. That would be the best place. You can contact me from there. And also my Instagram, which is at Rosini Ballerini. The ironic thing, adage does not define your life, but there's my Ballerini Instagram handle. I say that's the best place to contact me. I post a lot on there. Both I do my real life as well as my professional life because, I don't have the ability or mental space to do two separate accounts. So you'll see my toddler. You'll also see my pirouettes. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. And I will link those in the show notes as well. So if anybody is listening and wants to connect directly to those, I will put those links in the show notes of the episode. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really fun to chat, and we'll have to do it again sometime soon. And thank you everyone for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day.